If you're responsible for lots of children, if you're coming into the Charlotte Mason method later than you would have hoped, if you're bringing older children into it with you, then you're under a lot of pressure. You're trying to figure things out while you're learning how to do it. I've been asked to present this workshop because that's how I found my way into the Charlotte Mason method, trying to figure it out while the whole heavy freight train of a big family is already in motion. Perhaps you also feel like you're trying to paint your toenails while you're running a marathon that you didn't train for. It's not what you would have planned for. It's messy and there are trade-offs. You're trying to renovate the house while you live in it. Or you're trying to fix the ship while you're learning to sail it. You panic because the cabin's filling with water and eye level is slowly getting closer to sea level. There's an urgency and a desperation which comes with starting later by the time you've got a lot of kids and when you're also trying to get older children on side. There are a lot of needs, a lot of variables and a lot of water already under the bridge. In what's already a high pressure, hard work situation, you're going through your own process of change and adjustment. It's the sort of change that's really good for your family, but it's absorbing and it takes time. You've got a host of different persons who need to be respected and nourished, whose wills need to be brought into sweet fellowship with yourself and each other, whose bodies and emotions and intellects need to learn helpful habits which are good for them and each other. You know it needs doing, but maybe you're not quite sure how to do it. There's a squeeze inside and out. However we got here, we're all under pressure. And as we see the vast, nourishing, thorough philosophy of Charlotte Mason, many of us find ourselves moving through cycles of delight and despair. We can see the beauty and goodness of what Miss Mason had to say, but some of it is so far from where our family's at now. As we really get a handle on Charlotte Mason's ideas, we soon realise that our problem can't be fixed by buying a new curriculum or a cute printable or a new planner. Changing things in our families requires change from within us and change led by us. It's not something we can outsource or buy a solution to, and it certainly can't be done quickly. Like renovating an old house, there's a whole lot of unbuilding, unmaking that needs to happen before you start to see the new form take place. In the closing plenary today, I'll be talking about how we bear the weight of this solemn duty and what we can do to move toward having lighter hearts while we do it. That plenary is the foundation and the capstone for what I'm saying today in this workshop. When we're coming into the Charlotte Mason way with a family that's used to doing things differently, we tend to be in a hurry. Our sense of urgency, of needing things fixed now, can undermine us in the long run. It takes time to understand how Miss Mason's principles are applied. We're not installing a kitchen appliance. We haven't gone to a showroom and picked out what we want and waited for it to be delivered and installed for us, ready just to press the start switch. We're not installing an appliance, we're learning a new art. And there are no shortcuts through the process. The only way to get better at it is by doing it. The only way to become deft and intuitive with our materials is to use them a lot. But when we're in a high pressure hurry, we're more likely to paint ourselves into a corner. We invest so much in things that offer a short-term immediate solution, and we invest too little in the things that seem like harder work, but will be better for us in the long run. The props we rely on to help us cope with the pressure end up making our job harder. And the things we avoid because we're overwhelmed are the very things which would give us the buoyancy we need. The props most families rely on to buy some peace and to take some of the pressure off is digital entertainment. Our children are born with an insatiable desire to know and do all manner of interesting things. When they're not receiving many hours out of doors, when they're not encountering a world full of lively and invigorating ideas, when their hands, their capable hands, are idle, when they're not learning to do meaningful and beautiful work, then they become listless. They become bored and more demanding. It's harder to be with them. Our children are hungry, and in their need, they look to us. But we are not the feast. In their hunger, they turn to us, and we are overwhelmed. We don't know what to do about their neediness, and so we anesthetize them with a screen. Then their hunger for digital entertainment replaces their hunger to know. If we're to get anywhere with a Charlotte Mason education, then we need to win our children away from the screens. Then they'll become properly hungry again. How do we prepare the feast so that we don't get left caught feeling like our children are devouring us, eating us alive? The best things we have for dealing with the pressure of a large family, of older children who are making a transition into a new way of doing things, are the two great educational tools that Miss Mason gives us. We have habit training and living ideas. Habits are what we do with our minds and bodies as we move through time and space. As we learn to order our time well, then we help our minds and bodies along in helpful habits. As far as school lessons go, the schedule is the best tool we have for helping us direct the habits of our children. Without a definite task at a definite time, we become idle. Time sits heavily on our hands. Idleness never leads to virtuous character and joy and good fellowship among people. The foundation of healthy habits is knowing what to do and when to do it. In Charlotte Mason, habit training is so much bigger than a schedule, and a bad schedule will do you no good at all. But a good schedule is a significant mechanism for helping a whole group of people, like a family, grow into helpful habits together. It gives you leverage and helps you lift a weight, exert a force that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. If you're overwhelmed with lots of kids or older kids just getting the hang of things, your best pathway into better habits will be through that good schedule. Because a lot of different habits get swept up into well-ordered time. It's a broad coverage starting point to address things if habits are awry in your family. There's a steady, purposeful training of our wills that happen with a good schedule. We're going to circle around and come back and talk about the schedule more soon. But next we need to look at the other of our great educational tools, and that's living ideas. Living ideas are the unseen substance on which our minds grow, the things we think about which are good for us. Living ideas set new trains of thought in motion. They bring us in to know new things and to ask new questions. Living ideas generate a living response from the mind. They have an expansive effect on us. We start to see more and care more and make more connections between a great variety of interests once we encounter a living idea. Living ideas primarily come to us through paying attention to real things in the real world, living things, but they also come through living books. Living ideas come to us as we have unmediated contact with the living world and through unmediated contact with the minds of others through their words. I'm not going to give the out-of-doors life the attention it deserves in this workshop. I really recommend you just hunt down anything that Nicole, Liz or Emily have said about physical geography or about nature study. And that will help you understand how you can take your children outdoors in a way that allows them to make a living connection with what they find there. For the purposes of this talk today, we're just going to look at the living ideas which come to older children through good books. It's living ideas that change people. It's what moves us from doing and thinking one thing into something totally different. Living ideas change not only what we know, but what we want, what we desire. If we're coming into Charlotte Mason later, with older children, we have habits that need to change, but underneath that, we have ideas about what's good and what's desirable that need to shift. You're nourishing a group of persons toward wanting something new. Once we all want something new, it is much easier to redirect our habits. But new habits without any compelling idea are a depleting exertion. We come to want new things as our mind takes hold of new ideas, and we find those nourishing ideas in the best of books. We need worthy ideas written in beautiful language, ideas written in words fitly given. If you are starting Charlotte Mason from scratch, if you're new to it all and all the details seem delightful but overwhelming, you need to know the very first step that you need to take. The step after which everything else follows, the step that sets the pattern for the rest. Before you do anything else, before you find a schedule, get living books. The best books into the hands of your children. All the wondrous details of a Charlotte Mason education can follow on later, but without excellent books, you won't be able to do any of it, and your children won't want to. If your kids are not used to books, or they don't really like the books that have a reputation for being good, then do whatever it takes to help them build a good, joyful relationship with these literary allies. Wean them off screens and devices. Reduce digital entertainment. It's undermining every good habit and appetite that you want to cultivate. Even the very best books will be boring to a child who resorts to a screen for fun. If you're removing those stumbling blocks, then be sure to put a whole lot of variety in its place. You can't take something away and then not replace it with something better. But that's exactly what you're doing. You don't throw a heavy log into a cold fireplace with one match and expect it to light up. Fires are built over time with judicious feeding. Once it's been burning for a while though, you can put anything in and it's going to go. If your family book culture is a cold fireplace, then don't be discouraged and surprised when it takes time to warm up. Quite apart from schoolwork, build joyful family traditions around great books and lively, beautiful words. Build up a joyful read aloud habit with your children, even if they can read for themselves. Add poetry with lunch. Read a chapter of an excellent biography with Saturday night dessert. Build everyday family traditions around excellent stories and poetry. Have an anchor point each afternoon where everyone just has time to read quietly by themselves. Put on audiobooks in the car. Have another family over to have a feast and to read aloud from a great story. One of our favourite times to do that is at Christmas. In December, we have another large family over. We have great food, and then we read through Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. He's got a version that he abridged himself for his own public readings. So you can search things like that out and make some really great book memories that are tied to important relationships. Whatever you do, keep it short and cheerful when you're starting out. But you can litter your family life with the best ideas in the best words. As you do this together, you're going to be filling up the bank that you're going to need to take some withdrawals from later on as you're asking your kids to exert themselves with some new and harder things. But don't just dump a pile of books in front of your kids. Sit down with them and enter into something wonderful together. Both you and your children need that feeding. And it's just so good to look beyond ourselves together at the same thing. And as you choose books, not just any book will do. Don't believe the line that as long as they're reading, it's fine, it's better than nothing. We have so many forces working against our children's taste for what is good. So don't let them waste their precious mind on books by authors who so obviously despise them. Authors who think children need to be tricked into reading with gimmicks or base humour. I could spend another hour just talking about all the stumbling blocks our children and we have when it comes to reading worthy books, but that's for another time. If you want to read the best books, but you're not sure how to discern what a good book is or where to find them, then I have 2 places for you to look. You can join up or go look for Reshelving Alexandria. They have a great website. You can also find them on Facebook and Instagram. And they will help you to recognise what excellent books have been written in the past century for children. A lot of them are getting harder to find, so they'll also show you where you can track them down. You might also have someone nearby who has their own private living books library that they lend to families. A Delectable Education have a list of these living books lending libraries on their website. There are quite a few of them littered around the US. There's at least one and another one in the pipeline in Australia, and there are a couple of them popping up in the UK. There you'll find someone who can help you choose books for your children, and they will have thousands of books that you won't be able to easily acquire for yourselves. Imagine that there is a great literary stream that's been running across human history. The best stories, the best ideas in the most beautiful words. Your job is to cut a channel through hard, dry ground onto your barren field. Once the ground is broken and the water makes its natural way into your paddock, then everything comes to life. But without it, you and your children will be parched. Your job will be so much harder. Read to your children from a great variety of subjects. Variety is enlivening. Natural history, mythology, fairy tales, poetry, tales of travel and adventure, biography, historical fiction, fantasy. You never know when one idea will take hold and take root in the mind and heart of your child. The very idea which compels them to do and want something different. Don't go looking for a book to teach your child what you want them to think. We don't get to manipulate our children. Books are not a weapon. But you never know which tiny scene, which unexpected turn of phrase is going to be the catalyst for a new thought. Both good stories and human minds are far too wondrous to anticipate the chemistry that happens when they come together. We certainly can't orchestrate it. We don't need to try and arrange it and manage it. That's the Holy Spirit's job. We just need to find the great books and open them up and read them. As Miss Mason says, we acquire a taste for what we're fed. We learn to love what surrounds us. Once you have a family culture being brought to life by living books and time spent out of doors, time spent doing lovely, useful, interesting things, and as you start to understand Charlotte Mason's method better, you'll soon find that the variety of subjects and interests are far too hard to keep track of. There's just too many. You might find that no sooner does one of your children form a relationship with some new branch of knowledge than it's cut down by a less worthy diversion or by sheer busyness. You can have all the living books in the world on your shelf, but if you don't make time for them, they won't get read. And an unread living book is as good as dead. You need time and attention. My dog Connie loves to rummage in our compost pile out the back. Consequently, we now have a lot of pumpkin seeds scattered throughout our back lawn. The weather's been right, so the seeds have germinated beautifully. The problem is, it's summer in Australia and we have to mow the lawn twice a week. No sooner do those pumpkin seeds germinate than they're mown down. The pumpkin seedlings need a veggie patch, a space we've set aside where they're free to grow, where they're protected from the snails and the chickens and the running children and the lawnmower. A schedule is like a veggie patch. It's the place set aside to make sure the seeds of living ideas are sown and have a clear, protected space to flourish. Without a good schedule, we undermine our own efforts and intentions. We need honoured spaces for those seedlings to grow into fruitfulness. A good schedule does that for us. It allows us to marry living ideas with time and helpful habits. I never thought I would end up presenting at a conference about the beauty and necessity of a schedule. The first 5 years of my homeschooling experience were spent scoffing at the kind of people who had a timetable for their homeschool. I thought it was redundant and silly, a sign of insecurity and incompetence. I'm also not a linear thinker. Give me Shakespeare over an instruction manual any day. So reducing all my instincts and intuitions about education down to a spreadsheet didn't make sense to me. I much preferred spontaneity, doing what I felt like when I felt like doing it. But the more children you have, the harder spontaneity becomes. When all of life is one constant question and speculation, good things are left undone. Charlotte Mason persuaded me that an education built entirely on spontaneity leads to a shrinking, self-serving, narrow, fragmented knowledge. And this leads to shrinking, self-serving, narrow, fragmented people. A magnanimous education leads to magnanimous people, and a magnanimous education requires some planning. We had been home educating for 5 years before I really started to listen to Charlotte Mason, and through a certain podcast, I'd come to really want to give my children a great variety of subjects. I could see the value of short lessons, but I felt all the details, especially a schedule, was too much for my family. It would make things too complicated. I was thoroughly swamped with 5 students across 4 forms, not to mention the baby. Spreading a full and varied feast when you've never been methodical, when you're scared of planning, and when there are lots of children is paralysing. We were reading living books, but with no sense of order and no definite aim. The children were learning to narrate. I was making sure my spontaneous lessons were at least short lessons. But however short the lessons, while there are a great many interests for a great many children, the moving parts multiply very quickly. I found it was impossible to run on instincts, providing a generous offering of things and ideas for this number of children when I was waking up each day not quite sure of what I was meant to be doing. It was impossibly exhausting. I would waste so much time and energy every day just trying to remember all the good things that I was convinced we ought to be doing, that there was no energy left to actually do the work, let alone to do it in sweet and joyful fellowship with my children. We can't get the wills of our children on side when we don't have our own will on side, and when we can't remember what it is we're actually trying to will ourselves to do. So there was a practical need for more order in our family. But my move into a more careful use of time was ultimately a theological change. I came to see that because Jesus is Lord and I am not, I'm not free to do what I want when I want. That my days are not my own. In fact, I was more miserable when I lived that way, and so were the people who relied on me. Isn't it funny how the strategies we use to try and hedge and protect our own happiness end up making us less happy? I also, along with my husband, had a growing conviction about the authority that Jesus had given us for our children. That it was an authority not to use for our own convenience, but for their good. So this part of this meant learning to use our time in more healthy ways. I decided that I couldn't really hold opinions about Charlotte Mason being too hard for a large family until I gave her method a good go. Not my eclectic adaptation of her method, but the Charlotte Mason method done on Charlotte Mason's own terms. So I gave myself over to a year-long experiment. I think we're in our 3rd year of that year now. Saying yes to having a wholehearted go meant being home every morning, Monday to Friday. Being home and being attentive. My old philosophy that children just learn what they need to learn on the edge of the things that I need to do wasn't compatible with Charlotte Mason. I realised that giving my children what they need was a work which wasn't going to do itself, and no one else was responsible for doing it for me. The thing which was making it hard wasn't being a big family, it was my own distraction. Our homeschool needed time, and I had the option of reordering how our family used it. And that is how the schedule came to be part of my family life. Something not at first glance associated with freedom and joy in the Lord. So, our morning times became our work time. This meant not inviting visitors during those mornings, not making appointments, trying to stay off social media while we're doing work, not taking phone calls, not doing housework during those hours, not getting lost in a novel or absorbed in a creative project when I had a whims to do so, not running out to the activities organised by our local homeschoolers if they were booked for the morning. This meant honouring our morning lessons as my day job, giving it the sort of respect that I would give paid work away from the home. Chronic ill health and fatigue meant I wasn't quite sure that I'd actually be able to follow through on this. It was very much a case of saying, Lord, please make me strong for what you would have me do as I need to do it. I didn't think my body was up to it, but thought I should probably give it a go anyway. And it so happened that the steady daily rhythm was exactly what my body was waiting for. It had a transforming effect on my stamina. God has used this really ordinary thing to bring about the change and relief that I had prayed for a long time. He's so good and so wise. The definite hours also meant when I was exhausted, it was easier to push through because the lessons had a clear end point. Beside that, the variety of lessons and having some interesting things to do in the afternoon tended to generate more interest and energy rather than deplete from it. And as Miss Mason observes, our bodies become accustomed to the work we habitually give them to do. We get fitter and stronger by doing it. All because something's hard now doesn't mean it's always going to be a struggle. God has kindly built us with the capacity to grow and improve and adapt. Instead of seeing the schedule as a prop for insecure people or as something relevant to only particular personality types, I realised it was the only way that I could actually remember, organise and plan to implement my deepening convictions about what is good for my children. It was the only way that I could organise the love that I owed them. A few more observations about schedules. Firstly, a schedule means that we make decisions ahead of time so that in the moment of doing the work, energy is available for relating in a calm and pleasant way. The only way that I could have mental space available for helping my children practice the habit of attention was if my brain wasn't occupied trying to remember the next things 5 children need to do every 10 minutes. The schedule helped me learn to fix my attention on certain things at certain times. And we need to learn how to direct our own attention if we're going to help our children grow in the habit of learning to direct theirs. The schedule is a physical reminder every day to myself and my kids that none of us are our own, that we belong to the good Lord Jesus and that He has given us good work to do. When we have a plan outside ourselves, which we've chosen to submit ourselves to, a plan built out of convictions about what's good, we have a tool which trains us in the habit of looking beyond our own appetites in the moment. It gives us daily, hourly, minute-by-minute training in taking hold of our own feelings and compelling ourselves to do something which we might not have done otherwise. The schedule, wisely implemented, gives gentle and steady opportunities to train our wills. This is good for mothers, and this is the work we're meant to be helping our children mature in. It's a means of grace, training our characters. The more children you have, the more obvious it becomes that we all need to learn to compel ourselves to do things we sometimes don't want to do. Because a lot of people living in close proximity who all want to do only what they feel like make each other miserable. A good schedule gives the family the norm of what we're doing and when, so we're not left at the mercy of the strongest, most dominant personalities in the family. A good schedule can help protect the personhood of the variety of children we have. It surprised me that the key to reducing pressure in our family was something that had always represented pressure to me. I had avoided schedules because I thought they would make things worse, more stressful. But a schedule, built thoughtfully and done wisely, is actually a gift to ourselves and our families. It brings freedom and more joy. A sound schedule is a big, load-bearing architectural beam which holds up the roof. A schedule doesn't take the pressure away, it redistributes it more evenly. A good schedule will mean that force is redirected and the points at which it might cause stress become more predictable and easier to manage. The right beam in the right place, securely fixed, allows us to hold a load which couldn't be borne otherwise. It creates space and protects space where good things can happen. A good schedule ends up growing a mother's capacity and a family's capacity to absorb the strain of being a big family. The frame is always there doing its job, but as you get used to it, it recedes into the background and you become occupied with the details underneath it. As older children need to adjust to spending days differently, it's helpful to tell the kids that our schedule is our way of honouring their time and energy. When they see that we're subjecting ourselves to it rather than just imposing it on them, then there's an alliance made. We're both learning to give our best effort. The schedule isn't something we inflict on them, but an invitation to enjoy what's good together. When the daily schedule's printed up and visible, hot tip from Liz, then the whole family can see it all the time, and the need for children to consult with us about what's next is taken away. Less time and energy is wasted. It's a way of communicating clearly and consistently without needing to repeat ourselves. So that's a natural way to reduce some of the pressure and intensity of all our interactions together. A visible schedule reduces the number of holes in the family's tank of energy and happiness. If there's an initial pushback from older kids, then a few weeks of doing a steady schedule shows our children that this isn't up for negotiation. I've found, now that we're used to it, my kids actually miss a schedule when we're on term break. They go and invent their own because they've found the joy and the ease which comes with just having decided ahead of time how you're going to spend a big slab of free resources. They've come to enjoy the lilting rhythm that it brings. But a schedule filled with sawdust is of no use. A schedule is living only when it's filled with living ideas. It's not an end in itself. The schedule's the servant of a wide, varied feast. It's like the table where the banquet's spread. I tried to spread a feast without a schedule, through lots of excellent books, read in no particular order, but without a table to rest all the dishes on. Without that schedule, without the table and a method, there was a limit to what I could offer. It was only what I could hold in my hands at any one time. A good schedule expands the surface area, allowing you to offer more than you would have otherwise. A well-filled, thoughtfully ordered schedule gives our children the opportunity to learn to enjoy new good things. It brings them into a reach of all manner of ideas which they wouldn't encounter otherwise. A schedule allows you to give more, not less, to your children. Well, planning. The process of planning a schedule for a term is far more overwhelming than actually doing it. When I take a day to lay out all my ADE scheduling cards, there are hundreds of little pieces of paper scattered in front of me, which means there has to be a day where Steve takes the kids out because you can't do the job in 10 minutes and you can't have interruptions. And don't turn the fan on, otherwise they all blow away. The hardest thing about the planning experience is seeing everything for everyone laid out all in one space at one time. I'm often close to tears on those planning days. And here are some of the things I tell myself just to talk myself off the ledge of panic. Kathy, this is your work. It's work from the Lord Jesus and for the Lord Jesus. It's to be done through the Lord Jesus. He will provide what you need as you need it for what He would have you do. So, you just do the next thing, pick up the next piece of paper and look forward to seeing how the Lord will provide. Kathy, these little pieces of paper are symbols for great ideas. Look at all the things your children get to eat. Kathy, one overwhelming day of planning secures 100 less overwhelming days. This is an investment in future joy. I've gotten better at planning the schedule the more I do it. Every term gets easier. The experience of using the schedule that you've drawn up helps to craft a more effective one next time round. The first time you draw up a schedule, you're looking at a set of symbols on a page. It's arbitrary, it seems meaningless and abstract. But once you've spent 12 weeks living that schedule, doing the plan, then you know how it feels to move from geography to maths to singing and handicraft. So the next time you do the schedule, it's much easier to prepare. There are no shortcuts to getting better at it than by doing it. Well, trying to fill the table of a Charlotte Mason feast with a wide and varied array of dishes doesn't mean that everything stays on the table. Things fall off. But Jesus is Lord of the table and Lord of the floor. There is a difference between trying to offer a whole lot of good things to your children and it not going to plan, than withholding good things. We need to be productive and diligent, but then joyfully content when the Lord's provisions for us are different from what we had planned. Let's not be shocked when things don't go the way we hoped. We mustn't interpret every variation as a failure. Sometimes there's a good thing which the Lord doesn't have for us now. A wholehearted approach to Charlotte Mason is aspirational. It's a trajectory you're on, not a destiny you've arrived at or an outcome you've mastered. It's something you grow into. You don't have to have gotten everything right before it starts being good for your children. Growing into the Charlotte Mason method means creating space for a great variety of subjects. But then you have to grow into those spaces. Once we've got the broad beams of a schedule and that river of living ideas coming in, there will still be some subjects that you do a better job of than others. It takes time to work out how to do geography, arithmetic, Shakespeare, poetry, picture study, Swedish drill in the right way, in the best way, most helpful way for our children. But steadily, over time, we grow into offering more along more sound principles. But we don't have to think it's a waste until we get there. We get the broad brushstrokes in place, then we go back and fill in the details later on as we go. We need not be distressed that we don't understand the living way for every subject, for every age child we have right from the start. Start with what you do know and build in space for the things you're not confident about, and look forward to growth into those spaces over time. The quality of your Charlotte Mason homeschool and the accuracy of your instincts will mature. They'll get better as you do it. The things which take an enormous effort of the will now will start to become second nature, a bit like learning to drive or breastfeeding a baby. Something completely absorbing at the beginning eventually becomes something you can do with barely a conscious thought. Finally, when we're overwhelmed, when we're hurried and feeling the pressure of educating this way, we need to reframe the story that we're telling ourselves. There is a pressure that comes from living in a fallen world with ongoing grief and loss. But a lot of the pressure we feel as homeschooling mums comes from the burden of abundance. We're trying to steward exceedingly generous gifts with very small, weak hands. We have so much housework to do because we have houses full of good gifts. That's the last thing I remind myself of on those overwhelming planning days. The mountain of detail, the towering load of work is actually in abundance. God has given more good gifts than I can keep track of, and I get to plan for being productive with this bounty. We need to be aware of our ingratitude and our grumbling and our self-pity when actually we're the objects of great blessing. As we deal with pressure in our homeschool, it's tempting to think that if we could just get on top of things and feel some mastery, then everything would be better. As you find your way into doing what's good for your family, don't expect to feel mastery. Only God deserves to, because it is only true of Him. He is the only master. His way for us is that we would always remember our dependence on Him. We rely desperately on His power, on His goodness, and on His competence. The living tools we have to bring sustenance and nourishment into our homes, living ideas and a schedule that helps us cope with the pressure and keep things moving, these things will make everything a whole lot better. They are good provisions from the Lord. But He never provides in a way which lets us forget our need for Him. And when the pressure we feel leads us to a deeper dependence on Him, then we stumble into joy.